Nahal Nehushtan, a dry riverbed in Israel's southern desert, marked on modern maps by that exact name, Valley of the Serpent. Inside it stands an Egyptian sun temple, and inside that temple, archaeologists pulled a small copper serpent out of the sand. Now open a forbidden Enoch text almost nobody reads. It describes a creature flying beside the sun itself, named for a brazen serpent. Crocodile head, lion body, 12 wings, exact measured size. Officially, this is only poetic vision, nothing physical. But the valley is real. The object is real. The name never changed. And that is the problem. Drive north from a lot, and the road cuts straight into a horseshoe-shaped valley carved by a rift running through the Earth's crust. This is Timnah. Copper miners worked this ground for thousands of years. Egyptian expeditions came here in the 13th century BCE, cut shafts into pale sandstone, and left behind a small temple at the base of a rock formation still called Solomon's Pillars. That temple was built for Hathor, goddess of the sky, protector of miners, keeper of the sun's heat, and a place where the sun could kill you. You are told this is simply an industrial religious site, a mining shrine, nothing more. That explanation holds until you look at what the wadi running through this valley is called today on official Israeli survey maps right now. Nahal Nehushtan, the Valley of the Copper Serpent. Not a legend, a name on a map. Inside that temple, in its final phase, something changed. The Egyptians left, Midianite tribes moved in, and converted the shrine into a tent sanctuary. And in that layer, in 1969, excavator Benno Rothenberg found a small, cast copper snake, coiled, sitting among votive offerings to a god the site no longer served. Archaeologists compared it immediately to a passage most people can quote without knowing where it came from. Numbers chapter 21. The bronze serpent Moses raised in the wilderness. That object was later kept as a relic, worshipped in Jerusalem, and finally destroyed as an idol by King Hezekiah, because the people had started burning incense to it. 2 Kings calls that object by one word, Nehushtan, the same word sitting on a road sign in a desert valley 3,000 years later. Scholars call the connection suggestive, not confirmed. But suggestive is not the same as nothing. And now you're already inside the case file. You didn't get here through theology. You got here through a name on a map and an object in the dirt. That is where the text enters. Not the Enoch you were taught in Sunday school, if you were taught any Enoch at all. This is 2 Enoch. The Slavonic Enoch, the secrets of Enoch. And it is a text most Bible readers have never opened, because it was never allowed into the room. No Hebrew copy of it survives. No Aramaic copy survives. No fragment of it turned up at Qumran alongside the other Enoch material the Dead Sea Scrolls preserved. The only complete versions that exist anywhere on Earth are Old Church Slavonic manuscripts, more than 20 of them, copied in monasteries between the 1400s and the 1700s, centuries after whatever original was first written down. The original language behind them was almost certainly Greek. That Greek original is gone. What survives is a translation of a translation, preserved by monks who had every reason to soften or reshape whatever made them uncomfortable. And inside chapter 12 of that fragile, borrowed, monastery-copied text, the narrator, Enoch himself in the story, looks up during his ascent through the heavens and reports something specific. Not a feeling, not a symbol, a sighting. He says he saw other flying elements of the sun, and he names them phoenixes and chalkidri. Read the description slowly, because this is the part people skip past to get to the angel names, and skipping past it is exactly the mistake. These creatures have the head of a crocodile, the feet and tail of a lion, 12 wings each, a color like the rainbow, described as purple, and a stated size, 900 measures. Then the text gives them a job. They accompany the sun on its course. They carry heat and dew, as commanded. This is not a passage about glory or light or divine radiance in the abstract. This is a physical inventory. Head shape, limb structure, wing count, size, function. That is not how a symbol usually behaves. A symbol doesn't need measurements. A witness statement does. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The name Chalkidri is not some invented mystical word. It's Greek, and scholars have traced it for over a century to a compound meaning brazen hydras, copper serpents. Multiple reference works on this text point to the same conclusion. The name is likely a Greek rendering of the Hebrew word Nehushtan. The same Nehushtan destroyed in Jerusalem. The same Nehushtan sitting on a road sign above a desert valley in Israel, right now. A creature described flying beside the sun itself is carrying, in its own name, the label of a bronze idol condemned in Scripture and unearthed as a physical object in a solar temple in the desert. One detail like that could be coincidence. Etymology is slippery, names drift. But this is not the only thing lining up. Look again at the body the text assigns this creature. A crocodile's head. In the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern world, the crocodile is not a random animal. It is Egypt's animal, the Nile's animal, tied to gods of water, sun, and danger. And the temple sitting inside the valley called Nehushtan was built and run by Egyptian mining expeditions, dedicated to a solar and sky goddess, decorated with Egyptian religious imagery, staffed by Egyptian priests overseeing men working in lethal desert heat. A text describing a crocodile-headed guardian yoked to the sun's heat is sitting uncomfortably close to a real temple built by crocodile culture priests to a sun goddess in a valley that still carries the serpent's name. The official reading says this is simply visionary ornamentation, Greco-Egyptian imagination layered onto a Jewish apocalypse. That explanation works. It's clean. It's tidy. It's also starting to strain. Because clean explanations don't usually require this many independent details to line up by accident. And there's a second problem, buried inside the manuscript itself, not the desert. Scholars cannot agree on when 2 Enoch was written, and that disagreement is not small. One camp, early 20th century researchers including R.H. Charles and the Russian philologist Sokolov, argued for the 1st century CE, placing it inside the world of Second Temple Judaism, the same world that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. Another camp, led by the astronomer A.S.D. Maunder, argued the opposite extreme, that the whole text was medieval, composed by Bogomil heretics in the Balkans centuries later. A third position, from Dead Sea Scrolls scholar Joseph Milik, dated authorship to a Greek monk in the 9th or 10th century, based on a single technical word buried in a later chapter. 3 respected scholars, 3 different centuries, no consensus decades on. That is not academic noise. That means nobody can tell you with confidence how old the idea of a copper serpent sun guardian actually is inside Jewish or early Christian visionary tradition, whether it's ancient memory surfacing through a late copy or a late invention dressed up as ancient vision. The text has no fixed birth date, and a text with no fixed birth date is a text that can't be safely dismissed as just medieval imagination, because nobody can prove that's all it is. Return to the valley, because the valley won't stay still either. For decades, Rothenberg's original excavation dated the temple's main activity to the Late Bronze Age, the 1300s to 1100s BCE, Egyptian New Kingdom mining under pharaohs like Seti I. That was the accepted timeline for years. Then, starting in 2009, a team from the University of California, San Diego, later joined by Tel Aviv University's Erez Ben Yosef, ran fresh radiocarbon dating and archaeomagnetic testing on the slag left behind by the smelting furnaces. The results pushed major activity at Timna later than anyone expected, into the Iron Age, the 11th through 9th centuries BCE. That shift matters because that window lands directly inside the era traditionally associated with the united monarchy of ancient Israel, the era of Kings David and Solomon, the same broad era in which the biblical Nehushtan tradition is set, before its later destruction under Hezekiah. The ground itself got redated closer to the text it was already suspiciously named after. Nobody planned that. It happened because new lab techniques replaced old assumptions. The story didn't move, the evidence under it did. And the shift raises a harder question that some archaeologists have started asking directly. When the Egyptians withdrew and Midianite tribes took over that same shrine, converting it into a tent sanctuary, who exactly were they worshipping there? The metallurgical character of the site didn't change. The votive offerings, including that copper serpent, stayed inside a functioning cultic space. One academic proposal, not settled, not universal, but published and argued seriously, suggests the deity replacing Hathor in that later tent shrine phase may not have been a Midianite god at all. It may have been an early form of YHWH. If that reading holds any water, then you have a copper serpent inside a solar shrine surviving a change of religion in a valley later named for exactly that object, inside the same broad region and rough era where biblical tradition places a bronze serpent object being carried, venerated, and eventually condemned. That is 5 separate threads: name, object, location, era, and tradition, converging on one small patch of desert. Threads that have no reason to touch each other unless something real is sitting underneath them. Now, before this goes further, here is the honest line, and you need it, because the next reveal only works if you trust this one. This does not mean 2 Enoch's author ever set foot in Timnah. It does not mean the Chalkidri is that copper serpent. The scholarly language on the Timnah-Nehushtan connection is deliberately careful, suggestive, not confirmed. A 2009 announcement claimed the discovery of Coptic fragments of 2nd Enoch, which would be the first non-Slavonic evidence for the text ever found. But that claim remains difficult to verify in detail and should be treated as an open report, not proof. No inscription at Timnah names Moses. No manuscript of 2nd Enoch names a valley in the Araba. This is a convergence, not a confession. But a convergence this specific does not dissolve just because you say the word coincidence out loud. Because here's what doesn't go away. The text still says what it says. A creature flying beside the sun, given a name built from the Greek word for copper serpent, described with the animal head of Egypt's river god, tasked with carrying the sun's heat across the sky. Sitting in a document whose actual age nobody can pin down, sitting on top of a real desert valley, whose real name is the serpent's name. Sitting near a real object, dug out of a real solar temple, destroyed and rebuilt exactly in the window modern science now says the ground came alive. You can call every individual piece of that a symbol. Symbol, 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 symbol. At some point, you run out of times you're allowed to use that word before someone reasonably asks why a purely spiritual vision needed a crocodile's head, a lion's body, a wing count, an exact measurement, a job description, and a name that happens to translate into the one metal object the Bible says was worshipped and destroyed in a landscape that still remembers it by name. Go back to chapter 12 one more time and read it the way you'd read a report instead of a hymn. The writer isn't describing radiance. He's describing a creature he claims to have seen, physically distinguishable from angels around it, physically distinct in shape, assigned a physical task tied to a physical phenomenon, the sun's heat crossing the sky. Field notes don't usually bother with wing counts either, unless the person writing them is trying to record exactly what was in front of him. That's the discomfort at the center of this case. Not that the passage proves a hidden species existed, but that whoever wrote it, whenever they wrote it, reached for language that behaves like observation, wrapped it in the one name tied to a condemned cult object, and set the whole thing loose inside a document too fragile, too late copied, and too disputed for anyone to fully close the file on. The official position remains intact, and it should. Most scholars will tell you that chalky dry are a literary invention, Greco-Egyptian mythological furniture bolted onto a Jewish apocalyptic framework. Nothing more sinister than an ancient writer borrowing imagery from cultures around him. That is a completely reasonable position. It may even be the correct one. But reasonable is not the same as finished, because the valley is still called what it's called. The serpent is still sitting behind glass in the Nehushtan Pavilion at the Eretz Israel Museum, pulled from sand that hadn't been disturbed in 3,000 years. The manuscripts are still Slavonic copies of a lost Greek original nobody has ever read in its native tongue. And the dating fight over both the text and the temple ground is still, right now, unresolved among the people whose job it is to resolve it. So the mystery doesn't end with an answer. It ends the way real forbidden files usually do, with everything still sitting exactly where it was found. The wadi still runs through the Rift Valley, still carrying a name and has no obvious reason to carry, unless something old is buried inside that naming. The temple ruins still sit at the base of Solomon's pillars, half Egyptian, half Midianite, dedicated first to one sun goddess and possibly later to something else entirely. The copper serpent still coils inside its case, 3,000 years removed from whatever hands last set it down as an offering. And somewhere in a monastery archive's worth of borrowed Slavonic copies, a text still describes a creature with a crocodile's head and a copper serpent's name, flying beside the sun, doing a job, wearing a body, carrying a measurement, refusing, stubbornly, physically, to lie flat as only a symbol. You were told this was metaphor. Go stand in that valley and try to keep believing that the name is just a name.